welcome to Sterling Heights Public Library. My name is Brent, and today we've got a whole beef tenderloin. Come on down, I'll show you a little bit about it. Okay, now recently, if you were watching the Steak 101 segment, I mentioned the difference between prime and choice and select when you start talking about grading meat. And I mentioned that sometimes you get a really good price on select. Well, guess what? I found a really good price on select and tenderloin here. Now, one of the neat things about this here is that it doesn't really matter whether it's choice or select, because remember marbling? Marbling is all about the fat. Well, tenderloin has almost no fat in it to begin with, so there's no marbling to worry about. So you don't have to worry about whether it's select or choice. So this plastic packaging that it's in is typically referred to as a cryovac. And as long as it's in this cryovac, it will keep in the fridge for longer than you might think. There is going to still be a sell-by date on it. You do want to pay attention to that. But this will keep very well cold for a good long time. It freezes really well in this too. So if you get one and you can't use it right away, don't feel bad about freezing it. One thing you want to watch is when you unwrap one of these things, it's not unusual for there to be some liquid in here. So I'll go ahead and unzip this devil. And you can do this over a sink, or you can do it in a big shallow pan like I'm doing here, which will help catch some of that. And before you start doing a whole lot with this, you probably want to take a moment to just kind of dry it off. So there's our beef tenderloin. Take a moment to just kind of pat it dry. And you'll see that this is longer than the packaging was. So you may have noticed that the knife I'm using here is a little bit different than the chef's knife that we usually use. This here's a boning knife. These come in several different varieties, but what really makes them handy is they have a long, narrow blade. These things are quite sharp. You want to keep them quite sharp. They're very handy for dealing with meat, but they're not super useful for a lot of other things. If you don't have one of these, a really sharp paring knife will do a lot of the same thing. So let's take a look at this tenderloin here for a moment and just kind of talk about what we've got here. So along this outside edge here, there's going to be a seam here that you can kind of sort of open up a little bit just with your fingers. And this little piece here is referred to as the chain. And basically most of that is going to come right off of here. There's really not a tremendous amount of trimming to do on this. And there is some usable meat in this chain too, but sometimes you got to kind of work for it. So let's take a few moments here and just kind of work this little devil right out of here. This doesn't have very much of the chain actually on it, so we don't have very much trim on this at all. So I'm just going to temporarily drop that over here in my trim bin. And the main thing you got to watch out for on this is this stuff here. This is what they call silver skin. This here basically is a connective tissue. It connects the meat to the bone. Now, if you remember the Steak 101 segment, I mentioned that there's a little piece of tenderloin on a T-bone. This here is that whole tenderloin. There's only 2 of these on the whole cow, and they're not real big, but they run along up underneath the backbone on either side. So this here, if you just, let me show you here, you get your knife, you get the tip of it just underneath that, and then slide it along carefully. You don't want to have to go too fast with this. But then that there, just kind of, you want to get all this stuff off of here, because this silver skin is not something you want to be chewing on. It is very tough, very fibrous. But once it's gone, just about everything else on here is completely usable and very, very tasty. Now, there is, up on this thick end, some of that kind of goes down in behind the second muscle group here. So we're going to kind of work that out of there too. This is relatively easy to do, but you do want to take your time because this is not a cheap piece of meat. You don't want to make a whole lot of mistakes here. Okay, and on the back side here, you can see where these little marks are. This is pretty much right where it comes up along the backbone. More of that silver skin in there. You don't have to get every little teeny bit of fat out of here. The fat isn't going to hurt anything. You want to keep that knife just under the surface when you're doing this. You don't want to cut deeply into this. Now, this is pretty close, but I do want to get down into this seam a little bit and just kind of work that other piece right on out of there. Because there's a little bit of trimming to do on that as well. Kind of see where this really sharp knife comes in really handy here, because it makes your whole job much, much simpler. Just kind of wiggle that on out of there. Set that aside for a second. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and just kind of take that tail end off. We're not throwing this away. This is good stuff, but it does make what we're doing here a little bit. Okay, now, you've heard of filet mignon before? Okay, well, this is the meat that you get filet mignon off of. So I got this chunk that I took off of the thick end here where that seam was. I'm going to go ahead and cut this into 2 pieces. So we've got a couple of nice little petite fillets there. Now you can do all kinds of stuff with these things. Go ahead and just kind of cross-cut this every few inches here. Depends a little bit on how thick you want your steak. But this is one of those pieces that responds really well to quick cooking at high heat. And if you like your steak on the red or, pinkish red side, this is a great piece because it responds really well to that type of a treatment. Depending on how big you like these. But you only get so many portions on one of these. So we've got several nice pieces here. We've got these kind of center cuts, which are nice fillet style. Okay, we've got some kind of medium ones here. Got a couple of smaller ones. You can do different things with these. Now, these bigger ones make great steaks all by themselves. And very soon we will be showing you a great preparation for some of this as well. Today's segment is really mostly going to be about just how to trim and prep one of these things. Also, we've got these bits that we took off at the ends. These things here you can do all kinds of stuff with. You can just cut this up into smaller pieces and use it in a stir fry. You can grill it as is. It's not quite as pretty as something like this here is, but it's still very, very tasty. These littler pieces make great you know, as I mentioned, stir fry. You can use these on kebabs. This chunk we got here off of the chain, you do have to do a little bit more trimming on this in order to get all the stuff out of there, but there is some very useful meat in here. You don't have a lot of waste on one of these things. There's no bone, there's very little fat. The main thing you got to worry about is just getting that silver skin and any connective tissues out of there, because those can be very chewy. If you've heard of medallions of beef, a lot of times those are also going to be something like this here, where they take these smaller pieces and just cut them into a smaller bit and maybe just flatten them out a little bit. A lot of times these are going to be either pan fried or grilled, and they're very frequently served in pairs. So that's another thing you can do with that. I believe the next segment we're going to be doing, we'll show you how to prep these and make a nice compound butter for them, which will go very, very nicely with this beef. So how to trim a beef tenderloin.